First, principles, Jack. Simplicity. Read Marcus Aurelius. Of each particular thing asked, what is it in itself? What is its nature? What does he do, this man you seek?
He watches movies.
No, that is incidental. He podcasts. That is his nature. And how do we begin to podcast, Jack?
Well, I think if you take a pandemic and you add quarantine and then you download Audacity and buy a microphone. ... Spot on West Virginia accent.
Oh, man. This is The Horrible Idea. I'm Stephanie, here with Jack. Each week we watch a scary movie. We talk about it. This week is no different. What are we watching this week, Jack?
Oh, but it is different. We're very excited for this extra special horrible episode. We will talk about one of our favorite films, Silence of the Lambs, here on its 30th anniversary. Yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, this is one that we both super love, and on a most auspicious occasion. It was released on February 14th, Valentine's Day, 1991, directed by Jonathan Demme, screenplay by Ted Talley from a story by Thomas Harris. And the budget was $19 million, box office $272.7 million. Quite
Nice.
a box office smash.
IMDb gave it erroneously an 8.6.
Yeah, what do they know?
Rotten Tomatoes critics gave it a 96, which is correct, and Rotten Tomatoes audience gave it a 95. And what did your internet sleuthing give you?
Oh, well, my survey that I did on our Instagram at The Horrible Idea, it was 100%. Total 100% approval of this movie.
As it should be.
And, you know, the Academy agrees. It did a full sweep of the major categories the year of its release, including Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor and Actress, and Best Adapted Screenplay. And it's one of only 3 movies that's ever done that, the other 2 being It Happened One Night and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Yeah, and really the first horror or thriller to win Best Picture.
Yeah. And since, yeah. No. I thought Get Out might, change that, but the Academy chose poorly, so.
They chose poorly. Yeah, so there's a lot of information about this movie on the internet and in books and the commentary and various other things. So just to go over what's sort of out there, the interesting sort of trajectory that this movie got. So I read the book a long time ago. I just reread the first, that book and Hannibal a couple of months ago, but it was like a bestseller. And then Gene Hackman, of all people, bought the rights, thinking that he might direct it. And then it's sort of like twisted and turned and ended up, Ted Talley doing this amazing. It's considered like one of the screenplays, one of like the best screenplays. And interestingly, the original choice for both was Michelle Pfeiffer for Clarice, and I guess they say Sean Connery, but apparently Sean Connery didn't want to be part of it at all from the beginning.
Oh, but that was Demi's first choice. He wanted Sean Connery. And I'm like, I cannot picture that, but,
Yeah.
I ate her liver.
You know what you look like with your bad shoes.
Yeah.
Out of all, I've seen a bunch of casting what-ifs, and they reached out to a bunch of people, and the only person I saw who I think would have been interesting in Anthony Hopkins' place was Jeremy Irons, who at that point was, how old is he, in 91? You know, he was much younger than Anthony Hopkins, and you know, has sort of gravitas, but also has a creepiness to him. Would have been interesting. What
Yeah.
do you?
I mean,
Anybody else you can
ultimately,
see?
I'm glad that they went with who they went with. I really
Sure.
can't see at this point anyone else in these roles.
I
Yeah,
could see
like
a couple of people, but yeah.
well, in the main two, I can see it, but I just don't think like for Michelle Pfeiffer. I just think
Oh, she's
Jodie
all wrong.
Foster. Jodie Foster is a beautiful woman,
Yes.
but I feel like Michelle Pfeiffer doesn't look like. I feel like Jodie Foster looks more like a regular person. I feel like Michelle Pfeiffer
Right,
has
right.
almost like alien beauty thing going on where, you know, and I feel like Jodie Foster is far more believable as this, you know, FBI trainee than I would have found Michelle Pfeiffer to be.
Here are my two Clarices that I think Jodie Foster did a great, and I'll get into like specific reasons why I think she did really well in this part, because she is a strange person. Holly Hunter. She's Southern. She kind of can definitely pull off a better accent than Jodie Foster. And then my other, who's like, I think she's like 2 or 3 years older than Jodie Foster. But and my other choice, Frances McDormand.
Yeah, I guess I just always have pictured Frances McDormand as being like 35
Right.
forever. So I can't see her as like a young trainee, but I think she's got this sort of
Moxie.
you know, yeah, and this sort of normal person that you could really kind of relate to.
Now here's my thing with Jodie Foster. Jodie Foster, especially at this stage, and it's very apparent when you listen to the commentary, because she's so planned and strategic about taking this part. She has that Tom Cruise thing where she's not quite a person. She's like a acting robot, which doesn't mean like she's not good in things. She is, but I think she is like a construct.
That's interesting.
Yeah, you may not disagree. You may not agree, or you may not disagree either.
I may disagree.
Anyhow, so that's one, and then Anthony Hopkins is perfect. He's just rewatching it this time. He seemed so much smaller than I remembered him.
Yeah, I think that's so like they talked about there's an interview on the Criterion Blu-ray with a film and crime writer Maitland McDonough, and she talks about how in the series Hannibal, which we'll talk about later, Mads Mikkelsen is tall. He's 6 feet tall, and that, but he conveys the things about Hannibal Lecter in his like precision and careful like action and the way he's very precise, and but that and you reread the series more recently than I did. I always thought that Hannibal was supposed to be
He's
not
sort
a
of like,
giant.
right. He's not. He's definitely not 6 feet tall. But he's sort of like slight and wiry. Like he's very strong, but he's not like, buff. Kind of the way Matt Mikkelsen is a rippling god. Yeah, but I think it's interesting because I think they definitely both embody different aspects, and they embody things that the other one doesn't. Like, Anthony Hopkins
Yeah,
is
and
British.
yeah, and I think it's well done in that I think Anthony Hopkins is better suited to be the caged Hannibal, whereas
Yeah,
Mads
yeah.
is better suited to be the Hannibal unleashed, which is where I think some of like where the movie Hannibal. It's not the only problem with the movie Hannibal. There are
There are many.
several, but that's one of them. Is that I just find him far more compelling as this sort of presence within a box that's really malevolent. And then obviously he breaks out in the movie. But yeah, I think that they're both well cast for the position that character is in the vehicle that they're in.
Yeah. And, when we get into the plot, we'll maybe talk about the escape. But I think his stillness in the beginning, his whole escape is very interesting because it's all Demi doing an amazing job at directing, in that Anthony Hopkins doesn't really do anything hugely physical in it. He doesn't it's all this very sort of planned out, he locks the handcuff and then he lifts the baton in the air, but he's not wrestling.
Well, he whacks it back and forth a bunch of times. Yeah.
But it's not like...
Which, not to step on our scariness, but that's...
Right.
Ooh. So, a couple other facts I just wanted to throw in. A fun cameo from Roger Corman as the FBI director. Demi came up through the Corman machine. And apparently, George Romero also has a really brief cameo when he's part of the group following Chilton around when... Yeah. He's in, what is it, Nashville?
No, I think he's in is Nashville where the big cage is? Where the escape takes place?
I thought they were in...
He's in that building.
I thought he was in Tennessee, yeah. And then another sign that Siskel sucks is that he gave this movie a thumbs down in a bad review.
Ebert liked it, so...
Well, I mean, Ebert's clearly the better of the two. In my mind.
Yeah, it's interesting thinking about Anthony Hopkins and sort of, he did not, he had a career before this. He was definitely a stage actor, and he had parts in various, he didn't have a breakout thing. And then this just put him on an A-list status, and he was able to pretty much do whatever he wanted. And, he did all kinds of stuff after this. A lot of period pieces, a lot of weird choices. And then, at some point, a lot of money grab type of, Transformers movies.
Yeah, he's in the Thor movies, money grab.
Right.
And he plays Odin.
And that's a money grab, but it's also an interesting part. I think he did sort of famously say that he never had to do any acting with that part.
Oh, yeah, he just let the costumes do the work. Right. He was I just put on the armor and then I just did the thing.
Yeah. And, then there was Westworld, which I think he's great in Westworld. He's amazing in Westworld. And I think part of his character in Westworld is sort of the fact that he is also Hannibal Lecter, so...
Well, and he's also a treasure on Twitter and Instagram. He likes to play his piano and do paintings, and it's a very pure experience. He's also in the talks for the Oscars this year in a movie called The Father that no one has seen.
Interesting.
Except for a handful of critics, I guess. It's one of those movies that just you hear it's getting buzz, but you have no idea where to watch it.
Right. It's interesting, and in the
doesn't exist.
It's interesting in the commentary. He's just very kind and flattering to the cast and the director, and just seems like he is. I don't know. There's part of him seems like he might be a dick sometimes, but he also seems like he takes the entire collaborative process of acting pretty, he takes it with a lot of respect, and and just puts himself in the hands of the director. I thought a really great thing was, so in the beginning we were doing a little scene that was us in the beginning. That was not from the movie. That scene that we read in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
But that first time that Clarice and Lecter meet, and he makes fun of her accent, that was actually Anthony Hopkins making fun of her,
Jodie Foster.
Jodie Foster's accent, and then they sort of played with it, and she actually got offended, and then they used it, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, yeah. That's like one of the kind of famous notes about this, but like such a such an interesting. I mean, in the end, it garnered a great scene and reaction. So like maybe kind of a dick move, but I guess in the end it worked. So
Yeah. Well, we've talked a lot about this movie in the last 2 weeks. Um, and we've had some interesting conversations about gender identity and sort of the trans characters in this movie and how that whole aspect of the movie did not age incredibly well. And Stephanie, you found a great Twitter thread on this. Do you want to read some of that?
yeah. So this is a Twitter thread from Emily Vanderwerf, who is a really great TV and film critic and writer and thinker, and she has written for AV Club and Vox.com. And I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's a very long and very thoughtful Twitter thread, but her Twitter handle is at EmilyVDW. Additionally, she was the guest host on the Blank Check podcast that covered Silence of the Lambs. So if you're listening to our podcast and somehow haven't listened to that one, definitely check it out. She gives some really thoughtful background. And she's also written a lot about trans representation in film and TV. So this came up. She actually just tweeted about this a couple days ago. But basically, she said, I love that movie. Jonathan Demme is maybe my favorite American director of all time. I do not believe Silence of the Lambs is transphobic, especially for its time. I do believe it propped up transphobia, if that makes sense. And then she went on to say, I may be reading too much of what I know and love about Demme into the scenes where Hannibal is like, quote, Buffalo Bill is not transsexual, but the film does not seem to earnestly try to safeguard against us reading the character as trans. Poorly, but its intent is clear. Obviously, knowing the intent of a work doesn't mean shit because the intent is less important than the impact. And when people saw this movie, they didn't hear, quote, Buffalo Bill isn't trans. They saw a weirdo serial killer dancing around in women's clothes. This is what I mean when I say it propped up transphobia. The culture of the time was even more anti-trans than right now, which is how things like The Crying Game went largely unchallenged. So Silence of the Lambs ended up playing into that, no matter how little it meant to. And, you know, she has a lot more to say about it, but basically just that there is the scene in the movie where Hannibal Lecter says he is not a transsexual. He just doesn't like his identity and wants to change.
Right.
But seeing this, but people seeing this and not being really educated or sensitive to these issues just saw, like Emily says, a weirdo serial killer in women's clothing. And just like the floating of the suggestion that he's trans equates that. And basically she says that, other movies like The Crying Game and even like Ace Ventura do the same thing, but incredibly offensively.
Yeah.
And I know she said somewhere later on in the thread, basically, that, she said, movies like Ace Ventura were far more difficult for me to watch as a tiny trans girl. I think I'm temperamentally more able to live with transphobia in horror than in, say, comedy. Ideally, it wouldn't be anywhere, but horror is at least about our worst selves. TLDR, meaning well doesn't mean much when you accidentally prop up vile prejudice, but art is more than its worst qualities, and there are plenty of other reasons to recommend Silence of the Lambs, a legitimately great film. Just, with caution.
Right. Yeah, and it's hard with horror or thrillers to have any, minority or oppressed person as the bad guy. It's a complicated thing. And at the same time, you want representation all around.
Right.
Yeah, it's a complicated thing, and I think the way I like to handle it is to just sort of look at it critically, while also sort of just looking at the whole piece and the time when it came out. But I
Right.
remember, so maybe we'll get into like how we first heard about this movie or like what our first viewing of it was like. But I remember even when I was young and saw it, I was like, this doesn't seem right. And
I remember being confused by that.
right,
Just, being sort of like, I think, now I have a far better understanding of the, complications involved with portraying in 1991 a person that is coded as trans throughout most of the movie except for one throwaway line.
right.
It wasn't a throwaway line, but just one line saying like, no, he's not.
Well, also a serial killing psychiatrist, saying no, he's not
As the
trans.
authority on this,
Right,
yes,
right.
yeah. But and that's also, I don't. It's a very complicated thing, and I think if this movie weren't so well made and the performances weren't so amazing, I don't think it would still even be part of this whole conversation.
Right.
And it's a good conversation for people to keep having. So
Yeah. And the
yeah.
book doesn't I think doesn't do a better or a worse job, but there is a lot more of that plot line in the book, like the investigating all the different times James Gunn tried to have a gender reassignment and or a gender confirmation, and that's part of like the way that they find him. So yeah, the book is even it's more sort of problematic. But
Yeah.
but this movie came out in 1991, as we said, and I was 15 years old. So I don't remember when I first saw it, but I'm pretty sure I didn't see it in the theater. But maybe like a year or two after it came out, it was on cable like 24/7. It was one of those movies that like HBO just played over and over again. And so I remember seeing it at a friend's house and being like, what is this? So dark, so amazing. And then just being kind of obsessed with it. And I think I've seen it maybe at least once a year. I've seen this movie a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember I have a very vivid memory of being at the video store in my town, which was not a Blockbuster. It was just like a, you know, independent video rental place, and seeing the cover
Right.
with the iconic like Jodie Foster with the moth over her mouth, and being so scared of just that cover,
Yeah.
and but being like, what is that about? And I was so in 1991 I was 6, so I feel like it probably I was maybe 7 or 8 when this happened, when I saw this cover, and but I was so drawn to it, but also so frightened of it. And then I think I probably saw it for the first time in my early teens, or I don't know, maybe even earlier than that. Because I was, a latchkey kid, so if something was on TV, no one was around to tell me I couldn't watch it.
Yeah.
But I similarly, I've watched this at least once, probably 2 or 3 times, some years, every year, kind of as far back as I can remember. I own it on Blu-ray. I've owned it on DVD before. It's probably, it's my favorite movie. It's not maybe the movie that among my favorites I would say is the greatest film.
Right.
But it is the one that I enjoy watching the most.
Yeah.
I think it's so tightly edited. There's like no fat on it. It's the performances are amazing. The story is amazing. It's all incredible. So we didn't
Yeah.
have preconceptions. We just kind of had our decades long
Right.
love for this movie. So
Yeah, and so have you read the books or any of them?
yes, I
Okay.
read all of them. I've read Red Dragon and Silence of the Lambs twice, and then I read Hannibal Rising and Hannibal just once. I read them all while I was in Ireland a few years ago, and then I reread the other two.
Yeah, they kind of take a it's a very different quality level between books. It really
Yes.
it's weird.
I really like the Red Dragon book, and
I like
it's
it too,
interesting
yeah.
because they have returned to that well now 3 times in
Yeah.
video and TV, or movies and TV. So clearly that's like a really big story. There's also the whole complication, and we don't have to get into it because it's kind of boring, but there's the rights issues around
Yeah,
the
it's a
story,
nightmare.
which is so like the Clarice Silence of the Lambs storyline has different rights than the Red Dragon Will Graham Hannibal does. And that's why like the new Clarice TV series, I don't think they can reference Hannibal in it. It's very weird. It's even crazier than like Marvel X-Men. like,
Yeah.
so,
Well, hopefully
but
Disney will buy all of it, and then
God, our new Disney overlords.
I for one welcome them. Usually we do favorite characters. That's kind of ridiculous here because it's it's the two. It is
Right.
the
But I mean, we
holy...
can talk about them a little bit, I think.
Yeah. No, I'm just saying, like, let's talk about them. We don't need to.
We both
We don't
love
need
both
to.
of them. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think they're the obvious two. I mean, I love Clarice so much. Like, she is so strong, smart, brave. Um, there's, I loved the detail when she first goes to Crawford's office and she's still a trainee at that point, and he's referencing when she was a student and he lectured at UVA, and he says, "Oh, you grilled me on the Bureau's civil rights record in the Hoover
Right.
years," and then he says, "I gave you an A," and she's like, "A minus, sir." And I'm like, I already love her, and I think it was at like the 4-minute 30-second mark or something. I was like, I'm already totally on her side. She's just so great. The way she reacts to Chilton, the bravery she has just talking to Hannibal Lecter in that prison is just startling because you're like, she's clearly affected by it, but she doesn't back down.
Right.
And then Hannibal himself is just, he's so frightening. He's also so seductive. You want him to like you, not only because you don't want him to eat you, but you just want him to find you interesting.
Right. Or at least not rude.
Well, yeah, he's like dangerous, but he's a genius. He has great taste. He's worldly. And and that's I'm just talking about the Hannibal Lecter we see in Silence of the Lambs. Like, when we get to the Hannibal we see in the TV series Hannibal, it's like a whole nother layer. But
Sure.
all those things are true just of Anthony Hopkins' performance.
Yeah. The thing about Clarice that I love is, and especially her portrayal in this movie, she's like really strong and really confident, but at the same time she's scared shitless so much. And there's a lot of scenes where she handles things really, really smoothly, like even Hannibal's. One of my favorites is when he like asks her about Jack, and he's like, "Do you think he has sexual thoughts about you?" And she does this little chuckle, and she's like, "That kind of thing doesn't really interest me, Dr. Lecter." And there's a lot of that. There's a lot of like when she handles Chilton, when she handles like some of the cops and things like that, she just does this sort of smirk, and she's like, "Well, that's not really what I'm here to talk about, so let's just move on." And the book does get into it even more. Like, she uses her sort of, not that she uses her femininity, but she uses the expectations people have and sort of like the sort of gentlemanliness of people. She uses that to her benefit in really great ways. And it's really interesting that the movie doesn't show a lot of those parts of her, but it still gets the point across. Like in the book, a huge plot point is that she's like an amazing shot. That both she and Jack Crawford are like unbelievable marksmen, and she wins like an award. And they don't really get into that, but
Yeah, that was one of the deleted scenes. Was that like
right, right,
where there's a very extended scene in the deleted scenes of her at the firing range, and
yeah,
it's the scene where I forget what happens just before, but they hard cut to her just firing like at the camera basically.
right,
But instead of that, there was like a whole extended thing where they're showing how good a shot she is. And I will say, watching the deleted scenes in this case always makes me just appreciate even more so the art of editing, because there are things that, like, just like in that first meeting with Hannibal, they cut a part where he references the bag, and he's like, basically says like, oh, that's a good bag, but your shoes are old or something like that. And it's set before he does that little thing where he says, you know what you look like with your good bag and your cheap shoes. And so
yeah, yeah,
cutting that original part gives that the second more power,
right.
because it's like,
Al-
oh, he just read that at it.
exactly.
So yeah.
Although what you do lose is her comeback is one of like the classic parts of her personality, because he goes like, you know what you look like with your, oh, he goes, you brought your good bag but your shoes are shitty or something, right? And she kind of smiles and laughs. She goes, well, I hope my shoes will catch up to my bag. And it's such a great like self-deprecating but also kind of like standing your ground thing. So let me get into Hannibal, my love for Hannibal. Um, yeah, so in the commentary, someone, I think Demi, mentions Moriarty. And I think there is this sort of like classic, as in like the classic literature, like he is this classic literature character. He's like Moriarty. He's like Sherlock Holmes. He's like world traveler and a gourmet and speaks multiple languages and can draw beautifully. And he's, well dressed back when he had the ability to be so. And he's well spoken. And he's just like a character who's striving to be this sort of Renaissance man in the way that, contemporary people don't usually. And, it's a funny thing because people say this about a lot of characters, but like, oh, how could you? Isn't it weird how we all love Hannibal when he's like this cannibalistic serial killer? But the entire text, the entire movie, the entire book, whatever, the entire thing is totally made for you to want to be liked by Hannibal or be him or be, attracted or something. Like that's the whole point of the book. It is like Hannibal is amazing. Here, let me show you why. To the point where I think that turns on its head, or it makes a bad turn in the next books where you like Hannibal so much you want him to be a good guy, and then you get that weird, sort of like Dextery version of Hannibal where he's like only killing bad people and, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and like I also love throughout the way that Clarice she faces off against men throughout this whole thing. It's not just Hannibal. It's
Oh, yeah.
Chilton. It's it's Crawford, and the way that he when they're in West Virginia, he kind of does that. He's trying to just kind of work the sheriff to get him to like back off, but he does this sexist thing where he's like, oh, this kind of sex crime, I don't want to talk about it in front of a woman, and like looks
Right.
at Clarice, and he's like, oh, I was, later on he's like, oh, I was just trying to like get them out of there, and she's like, it matters, they look
Right.
to you for how to treat me, and
It's interesting. A lot of people bring up that scene and I agree with it, but then in sort of like the next scene, she doesn't do the exact same thing, but she says, remember when they're about to like look at the body and there's all these officers in the room, and she goes, "Hey,
Oh, and she
everybody,
goes, "Gone now."
gone now," and she kind of says like, "We don't want everyone seeing her body," and so on. So she's sort of using the same logic.
Sure, but without,
Without someone
denigrating a
doing
live
it.
human being.
Sure. No,
That's there in the room. But but like throughout, even in the beginning, and I do love the way that the movie starts with her on this obstacle course, and the movie ends with her in this obstacle course that is Buffalo Bill's, basement, what's the word, labyrinth. And Buffalo Bill is kind of like the Minotaur coming after her, but from the very beginning, even when she's going to Crawford's office and she gets in that elevator and all the guys are like 7 inches to a foot taller than her.
Yeah, that's great.
And yeah, just generally throughout the whole movie, she's just kind of facing off against men and either finding them equal or surpassing. And she's just she's a trainee. She's not even a full agent yet.
Right.
So what are some of, obviously we know we love Clarice and Hannibal, and I think anyone listening to this point knows as well. What are some of your favorite other characters that aren't these major two?
It is, I'll use your favorite term. It is the James Gum of it all.
Oh, God.
I like Jack Crawford. It's such a rewatching it lately. I found myself drawn to Jack Crawford more, and like it's a very patient and very subtle performance.
Oh, Scott Glenn is great.
Scott Glenn is great. It's also like one of those, like, whereas Clarice and Hannibal, those characters are those actors. Like, a few different people could have played him, and it would have gone very... Like, you could take that character in many different directions. Like, I mean, look at Hannibal, the series. Like, Jack Crawford
Lawrence
is
Fishburne,
very, very different character.
Right.
And that, the movie doesn't get into the whole subplot of Jack Crawford's wife being very ill and dying, and that's like a very sort of poignant part of the book, and in the series they get into it as well.
Well, I think she's already passed away by this point. There was originally, I believe, in the script.
Well, in the book she isn't dead. That's what I mean. But okay.
Well, yeah, I think there was originally a scene in the script. At least I've read this where Clarice and Crawford are. It's kind of suggested that something happened,
right?
And they cut it out of the movie, and I'm very glad they did, because that would have been a stupid thing, I think. But
yeah, I think it would be a stupid thing, and also like it could be there. Like, I like that it sort of could be there. Like, there's just a little whisper of it if you look at the sort of subtext close enough. My favorite character is obviously Multiple Miggs.
Ugh. That's not even funny. That's just gross. I hate him.
My favorite character in the book, I think, besides the big two, is in the movie but doesn't play a big part, which is Barney, the head orderly.
Yeah. He's got a much bigger role, in the books.
Yeah, and he also does a really great thing in that Hannibal likes him a lot, and then Hannibal does a variety of things for him, and it sort of shows you that, like, if Hannibal likes you, then he likes you, and like he will not only not kill you, he will still fuck with you, but he may give you a bunch of money or do something for you.
Right. And I think that I think it speaks to, I think Frankie Faison has a kind of just natural charm and kindness that he can convey, and so the character of Barney isn't written out in the movie,
right?
But you get the broad strokes of, like, this is a good guy, and even just the way they cut to him and the way that he's reacting when Chilton is being a dick to Hannibal, and you could tell Barney feels complicated about this, and he
Oh,
doesn't
Chilton is
like
such a
Chilton.
dick.
He's such a dick, but he's so good. Like the performance is so great because he's just vile from the beginning.
He is. What about you? Who are your favorite
Well,
secondaries?
I love Ardelia, who is played by Cassie Lemons, and she is a director. She directed a really great 90s movie, Eve's Bayou. And then also, I think just last year or the year before, Harriet, the Harriet Tubman biopic.
Right.
She's great as Clarice's best friend and fellow trainee. I love the scientist from the Smithsonian.
Yes.
That whole scene is just so like charming and fun, and just the way that, like the way they're playing chess with the bugs, and when he's like, so this is a clue from a murder case? Too well. Like, they're so charming. And then, of course, I love Chris Isaac as the SWAT team leader. He has like 2 lines, but it's great. And finally, my favorite, who has my favorite line, is the FBI guy who pulls Clarice out of training when they're going to West Virginia. And he's like, found a body in the water. You're going to West Virginia. Looks like a Buffalo Bill type situation. Just the way he says it is like one of my favorite lines from the movie. Yeah, the cast is just stacked. Like, everybody's great.
Do you want to talk about James Gumb?
Well, I was going to say next, Catherine Martin.
Oh, yeah.
I love the introduction of Catherine Martin. That scene, that's like such a perfect crystallization. You get who she is right away.
Right.
You're on her side. You want to protect her right away because she's just like singing Tom Petty in her car and like having a good old time. And you're immediately like, no, don't help this guy with his car. Like,
My 2 favorite parts about her character specifically is, one, I think the point I laughed out loud the most in this movie is when Clarice goes down to the basement.
Yeah. I know you don't. She's like, get me out of here, you fucking bitch.
Yeah. And then after they kill James Gumb, she's holding Precious, and she like goes out of the house with Precious.
Yeah, she won't. I think someone tries to like take Precious, and she's like, nope, I'm keeping her.
I think they say in the book that she like kept the dog and like took care
I
of
hope
him.
so.
Yeah.
Because, Precious, it seemed like James treated Precious okay, but she deserves a better home situation, I think.
Yeah, and she may have seen some shit that, dogs shouldn't see.
Houses that don't have rotting old ladies in bathtubs,
Right. Also, I keep coming back to the book, but it is like fresh in my head. But Ardelia Mapp is great in the movie, but in the book, she's like a more important character, and there's a lot of like, Ardelia, Clarice, like chatting, and she's also like supposed to be one of the best students in the academy, kind of like Clarice. They're both like the 2 top dogs.
Right. That leads me to one of my favorite things is the scene where Clarice is looking at the old articles on the microfiche machine. I feel like I'm probably the youngest person that still used and learned how to use a microfiche, because people I know my age or younger like don't have any idea what they are. But I just love it's a very old tech thing in the movie. Like, no one, maybe you use them in your capacity. No, I mean currently. Like, I feel like it's a.
I don't. So I work for the Brooklyn Public Library, and I do not use microfiche, but we do have them.
Yes.
But I did use them in high school, and looked up lots of newspaper articles.
I use them too. I just feel like if I mention them to anyone, I'm 35. If I mention them to anyone my age or younger, they're like, "What?" Like the thing in Silence of the Lambs. Anyway, so let's talk about the thriller versus horror conversation, because I feel like this is one of those movies that comes up a lot, that there's the debate, is it horror, is it a thriller?
I think there's a certain point where a movie is artistically directed that it's not going to fall into genre lines specifically.
Right.
I don't think this movie is trying to be. I think this movie is trying to be Silence of the Lambs, like it is trying to be a specific thing that I think has a lot of elements of horror and a lot of elements of thrillers. I think a different director could have taken this script and made it firmly in either direction.
Yeah. Well, and I think that they are drawing, like, the night vision scene at the end is, I think that's really effective horror.
Yeah, and the old lady in the bathtub, there's like a lot of,
Yeah, but just that whole, like, the night vision sequence still gives me the creeps, because even before the night vision starts, just how you can see how, like, shattered and scared Clarice is, but she's still so, like, brave in the face of that. Like, she's shaking as she goes through, like, every doorway, but she's still, like, driven and just, yeah, I don't know. The night vision sequence is so effective to me. And also the sequence with Hannibal when he's kills the guards and trusses the one up with the flag.
Yeah.
It's so, with the Goldberg variations playing,
right.
and it's so good. And apparently, so I know just a little tidbit, I think it was actually Anthony Hopkins' idea to have Hannibal in white for that scene.
Yeah, that was in the commentary.
Which is a good call, because the blood on him, and he seems so clinical, and it still creeps me out to this day, but it's so amazing.
Yeah. I love that scene, and it is directed so well in the, like, sort of he's sitting behind this privacy screen, I guess, on the toilet, and then he comes out and just fiddling in his mouth with this piece of the pen, and it's just like, and then the pen was like a little, the camera just hung on the pen when Chilton left it in the cell, and so you're just like putting all the pieces together, and you're waiting for it to show up.
Even when he's gonna sign the transfer of Hannibal,
he can't find his pen.
He's like looking for the pen, and they kind of zoom in on Hannibal, and he's with the mask on. And he's kind of looking around.
Tee-hee. Do you want to talk about this versus the show and other sort of media?
The greater Hannibal universe? Yeah. So, I mean, to me, and I know we'll get into it, but to me, this is my favorite entry, with probably the show Hannibal in second, but I also really love Michael Mann's Manhunter.
Yeah.
It's a very of its time movie, and I do not like I think Brian Cox is good as Hannibal, but he isn't on the same level as Anthony Hopkins or Mads, but I have a great affection for it. Now, if we're talking about the movie Red Dragon, the movie Hannibal, my first inklings about the TV series Clarice, I'll reserve final judgment. It doesn't look very good, but the Red Dragon movie and the Hannibal movie are both bad. I've not seen the Hannibal Rising movie. Have you seen that?
No, I think I watched a little bit of it, but both the Red Dragon and Hannibal the movie, they have good parts. They're interesting.
But yeah, I did like Ralph Fiennes as Dolarhyde. The Red Dragon and Manhunter, between the two of them, I definitely prefer Manhunter. I just find the Michael Mann treatment of it to be really effective. I really like William Peterson as Will Graham. Um, Tom Noonan as Dolarhyde is so creepy.
Right.
He's because Rafe Fiennes has an innate sort of, I'll just say it, hotness that makes me like less likely to be super afraid of him. Even though he's played a lot of villains, but Tom Noonan is so creepy that like I was legit frightened of him in Manhunter, in Manhunter. And William Peterson has this very like kind of naive air to him in Manhunter that I don't feel like Ed Norton has the same vibe.
Right.
But
And I feel like in Hannibal the show, Richard Armitage is sort of playing Ray Fiennes in some ways.
right,
Um,
yeah,
but I will say something that might surprise you. I would put Hannibal the TV show at the top of my list. And
yeah. I
then
read that. I'm kind of
Silence of the
surprised.
Lambs. Well, there's just so much more. And
Right, which I guess is that's kind of the paradox, right? There's so much more, which means there's so much more occasions for it to kind of falter. Because I
sure.
think there are some episodes that are kind of like,
Oh, absolutely. And
so
part of that is the show, and part of that is the source material. Because like the
right.
whole
Like I think
Japanese,
there's that, and also by the third season, it was just sort of like turning into there was all these kaleidoscopic things that were like getting really trippy.
I was
Um,
into that.
I
I'm into the
I
third
liked it.
season.
I just liked it when they were reined in a little bit more in like the first and
Yeah,
second season. Um, but this is also a thing that I've been getting into a lot recently, which is I've been focused a lot more, I think, this year so far on movies versus TV,
right.
just in that it's in a movie, unless you're doing something like Marvel, um, it's 2, maybe 3 hours at the most. It's a contained story. Whereas a series, it's got, sometimes several seasons.
Right.
Um, it's just a lot more time investment. But yeah, the Hannibal show is amazing. And if anyone's listening to this and hasn't watched it, it's available, I think, on Netflix and on Amazon Prime. It's readily available,
Yeah.
so you should definitely watch it.
And also, I mean, I'm very into men's fashion, and I'm very into food, and those are two things not found in Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah.
Unless you count the off-white Panama suit at the end.
Oh God. Well, and that's both, you know, it's both a detriment, I guess, in the perspective that you're coming from, but it's also, I think, part of its charm in that everyone does just look so kind of like plain and average, and but it's this story that's really like almost kind of otherworldly, horrifying, um, but in such banal settings.
My biggest regret and my biggest desire in this entire Hannibal world is I want Clarice and Will to engage in some way. So in the book Silence of the Lambs, they mention Will, and he's sort of in Florida and all kind of scarred and
Yeah.
implied that maybe he's an alcoholic and just not doing
Well, and
great.
that's how Manhunter is,
Right.
where he's working on boats, and they kind of reference that in the Hannibal series, where they're
Yeah.
I just want to work on boats or whatever. Yeah.
But Clarice and Will are very similar in many ways and very different in many ways, and I think it would just be great to have a conversation between them. And if
Right.
they were going to do the fourth season of Hannibal, they were going to try to do Silence of the Lambs, and I can only imagine they would have had Will in there some way.
Right.
And so, but that's really tough because it's really easy to mess up Clarice, and
Yeah,
the chances.
yeah, and especially just because this was done so well and is so iconic, and the you know, the fact that they redid the Will Graham storyline 3 times now
Right.
is that sort of a testament to the fact, well, there's the whole rights issue, but also that I don't think Manhunter or Red Dragon were either definitive, kind of untouchable versions. They
Right.
both have flaws, and um, and Silence of the Lambs certainly has flaws, but it's so iconic and well known at this point that I think it would be hard to do. And so I'm interested to see how the CBS series Clarice
Yeah.
does. From first examination of the trailer, I'm not overly confident. And I also, they took the title credits font and you reused it for the series, which I was like, that's
Right.
one of the worst things in Silence of the Lambs is that horrible font.
Uh,
But,
l-
you know.
Let me get a reading on this from you. Julianne Moore. What did you think of her, Clarice?
um, I didn't love it, but I can't tell if it's just because I didn't like the movie,
Right.
you know?
It's also not like I don't remember. Like I remember the movie, but like there was nothing she did that was really memorable.
Well, it starts with her, like, shooting the drug dealer
Right.
lady
Which
who's
is the way the book
carrying
starts. Yeah.
a baby, and then, I don't know, and then it ends with her, spoiler alert, it ends with her, like,
Running
the
away.
whole
with
romantic scene with Hannibal.
I have to
And I know
say.
that that's part of the book, but
Right. Right.
I don't know.
I have to say. So I read that book before seeing the movie, and reading that book was one of the weirdest experiences of my life in literature, because I was just like, from the beginning you're like, what the hell is she's in like South Central, she's like shooting
Yeah.
a like drug, and then it just goes in such bizarre places, and by the end I'm just like, is this even, am I reading a real book? Is this fan fiction? What is this?
Yeah. Like, I do find the whole Mason Verger storyline interesting.
Yeah, that part's
Um
interesting.
I think I liked it better in the book than I did in the Hannibal series, actually.
Somewhat, but Margot is great. So
See, I didn't like that they made Margot so femme and in the series. I kind of liked her
the book is
as the bodybuilder.
yeah. In the book, she's like this super buff bodybuilder, which was like interesting, but I couldn't. It just seems so like out of place. It was very strange.
I don't know. I could see Mason Verger having like this, really buff bodybuilder sister. I don't know.
Yeah,
I just liked, I had that mental image and I liked that character, and then they made her super like femme, and I
yeah.
mean they maintained her like queerness, but anyway, I didn't hate it. I just really liked that version that I had in my head. It's one of those things that's like,
Yeah.
Complicated when you read a thing and have a perspective.
All right. So, final reactions. Yeah, this is. Tell me your breakdown of your feelings about this film.
Well, I love Jonathan Demme. Rest in peace. What a king. He's an amazing director. Stop Making Sense is one of the best documentary music films ever. This is in the running for my favorite, if not maybe my second favorite movie of all time. I love how he tells the story of Clarice. I love, you know, Demme is sort of famous for that straight to camera
Right.
technique, and he uses it in this really well because he uses it so that we so strongly identify with Clarice through the whole thing. Is everyone who's talking to Clarice talks directly at us, but she talks just slightly off center.
Right.
And it's it's sounds like a really basic technique, but it's used really effectively. The cinematography by Tak Fujimoto is great. The just every performance basically from top to bottom is amazing. Um, we didn't really get into Ted Levine as Buffalo Bill. Obviously we have talked about the complication with his character, but I don't think that takes away from his performance.
It
And
is
I
it
think,
is a breathtakingly weird performance that is
yes,
amazing.
yeah. Um, and we also didn't reference Goodbye Horses by Q Lazarus,
Key Lazarus.
which
It's an
is
amazing
just
song.
a incredibly perfect song for this movie that Demi makes a lot of great music choices in his movies. I'm just gonna keep rambling. The score is incredible from the very opening scene, and again, I just love the fact that there's this young trainee who's kind of thrown into this world, really high stakes world. Jack Crawford sends her there to get the information about Buffalo Bill. And he doesn't tell her that, and he gives his reasons, but it's an incredibly high stakes situation, and she is, finds the measure of it and rises to the occasion and does better work than the entire rest of the FBI,
Yeah.
and actually finds Buffalo Bill and saves Catherine. Um, Jodie Foster is amazing. She deserves the Oscar. And, Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal is just an iconic villain of all time. I give it a stare factor. I'm probably going to give it a stare factor of like 7.5.
Wow.
It doesn't have jump scares really, but it's so just in your bones creepy, and it's using so many elements from true crime, like the bandage on the arm, getting someone to help you put
Right.
furniture in. That's a Ted Bundy thing.
Mm-hmm.
And cutting the skin and using it to make clothing is a Ed Gein thing. And there's elements of Psycho, and it's such true crime fodder that's being used in a really artistic way, and you're totally enveloped in it from the very beginning. And there's a reason why I watch it like a couple times every year. It's just really watchable, really creepy. I'm giving this a 10 out of a 10 for entertainment factor.
That's shocking.
I don't know what else to say. It's a classic.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is the first time I watched it with commentary, and it did add a level. And as I said, I read the book a couple of months ago. It's just great. It's so Jodie Foster brings up the sort of Campbellian hero's journey, but how she's a woman, and so her journey is like different inherently. And I was sort of watching that because it's a very well constructed narrative of this character starting out literally as like a student, and then to the point where she overtakes the skill of all the other FBI. So it's a lot of things. It's realistic in many ways, but it's also like a very sort of staged journey. And I was thinking about that and watching it this time, and thinking about how like a part of the hero's journey is always a mentor, like Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda, and but she has these two mentors which are opposite sides of the coin. Jack Crawford is like law and sort of goodness and temperance and and then Lecter is like chaos and hedonism and evil and sexiness. And she's sort of learning from both of them, and it's interesting. It's also interesting that there is a sort of, whether you read it or not, well, I guess if you read it the way I do, there is a sexual and romantic element in both of those relationships, whether it's like played out or not, which you don't see in a masculine hero's journey, which is, kind of shitty and kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't see that. Your read is your read. I don't see the sexual thing with Crawford, and you're not alone. Many people have said that.
Right.
Just in my viewing of it, I don't get that. But
And maybe the book is it's a little. I think it's a little more played out in the book, but
right.
so that might be. But that dynamic, and also the dynamic that I remember watching, and I'd never seen this thing where like Clarice is going out and being active, and then she sort of like keeps coming back to Hannibal, and then having these really sort of, just conversations where neither one of them are moving. So it's this like staggered thing where she goes out and does a thing, and then she talks about it, and then she goes out and does a thing. And it's just, I talked about James Wan and feeling constructed. This movie is very constructed. This movie is like playing with your emotions in a very like programmed way, but you don't feel it. You're just like there. You're just like, yes, take me on this ride. Make me like a serial killer. Make me, not like this other serial killer. Yeah, so it's a great film, and it's also like a kind of transgressive film, especially for something that was so popular. So I don't think you would have like Fincher's stuff, and I don't know who else.
Yeah, I was actually listening to. I can't remember who I was listening to, but basically they were talking about this in comparison to Seven, and
Right.
how this is a dark film, but it's not bleak.
Right.
Like it shows there are people like Clarice. They can, save Catherine. They can take down Buffalo Bill. It's still dealing with something incredibly dark, but whereas Seven is just bleak.
Right.
There is no hope at the end. And yeah, but yes, this definitely paved the way for this walked so David Fincher could run straight into hell.
It's interesting. So Michelle Pfeiffer, one of the reasons she said she didn't take it is because evil won at the end. Because Hannibal is free, and Hannibal is going to go kill Chilton. Sure. So, but it's funny how like that's furthest thing from my mind as it ends. Jamie Gunn
I don't think
evil.
of it. Yeah, I don't think of it. I mean, yes, Hannibal does some awful things, but that's the testament to the movie is that you sort of are like, yeah, go kill Chilton. He sucks,
yeah.
and we like Hannibal.
So scare factor, I'd say a 5. There's scary moments, but I'm less dead inside than I was before. But I saw this when I was a kid, so there is sort of internal memories of fear. And entertainment factor, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6. I don't know. No, 10, 10.5. 10 out of 10. It's one of this and Ghostbusters and Caddyshack.
What a triumph!
That's a marathon.
Power.
That's a marathon to watch.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love this movie, and I love the show, and I like the first 2 books. So yeah.
So what are we watching next time, Jack?
Well, next time we are going merely 1 year later to 1992's Candyman.
Yeah, this is exciting because there is a new Candyman coming out, I think maybe October of this year.
Yeah.
Directed by Nia DaCosta. So good timing. I wanted to watch the original before I watched the new one.
Right, and it gets us to revisit Clive Barker since it's based on his story. So review us on Apple Podcast, Stitcher, wherever you listen to podcasts. Review us. Don't be scared. It's all going to be cool.
And if you have any interesting facts about Silence of the Lambs, any fun takes or tidbits, Or if you have a suggestion for a movie that's really scary that maybe is not on our radar, let us know on Twitter or email us at thehorribleidea@gmail.com.